So, all right, now we can get into this morning's lesson. We're on lesson number 2, the Word of Flame Curriculum, Pentecostal Publishing House. I think I have to do that for copyright stuff with the video. Facebook will shut it off. Title of the quarter is God is Faithful. Title for today's lesson is God Hears Elijah's Plan. And I was saying we're on lesson number 2. We did lesson number 1 last week online. Hopefully you were able to watch it. Because here in a little while, this lesson is going to kind of pick back up where last week left off, but it's going to go around some other directions first. The focus thought is that God honors His preachers' prayers. The focus verse from 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 24. And the woman said to Elijah, Now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in thy mouth is truth. In the lesson text it says, And it came to pass after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick, and his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. And she said unto Elijah, What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? And he said unto her, Give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom, and carried him up into a loft where he abode, and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourned by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times, and cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come unto him again. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child, and brought him down out of the chamber into the house, and delivered him unto his mother. And Elijah said, See, thy son liveth. I love the way he kind of ended that. It's kind of like when someone, your wife tells you to fix something at the house, and you fix it, and you walk back in and go, See, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. See, your son's alive. I just kind of like that last little bit there. All right, the culture connection, talking about something that happened in 1989 in the Bayou Bartholomew. With it saying Bayou Bartholomew, I can only assume it was Louisiana. But in July of 1989, Jerry Self and his brother-in-law were faced with the reality that in 3 hours, 500 acres of sweet potatoes would be underwater. 12 inches of rainfall had pushed the Bayou Bartholomew out of its banks, and it had reached the edge of Jerry's farmland. In desperation, he called his pastors, A.J. and Dwight Fulton, to come pray for a miracle. Both pastors arrived quickly, and the men sat on a log that had floated to the edge of the field out of the bayou, and they began to pray. After the pastors left, Jerry continued to monitor the water and found it had stopped rising. Now, some of your so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good people would say, well, where was his faith? Why would he even test the water after they prayed? If he believed God was going to stop the flood, he shouldn't have no business out there measuring to see if it had risen or not. But you got to realize this man's a farmer. That's 500 acres of sweet potatoes. That's a good chunk of change. Yes, he prayed. Yes, he has faith in what God can do, but he's also using a little bit of smarts to see what was going on. Well, he sees that it has stopped rising right there at his field. Believing that the water had crested, Jerry checked the water levels to the north and to the south, only to learn that at those locations, the water was still rising. Jerry continually checked the gauges and spoke with other farmers, and again to receive the same report. The water in their areas was still rising. He went back to his fields wondering what he would find. He took another measurement, and he found that the water had stayed the same level that it was. It's rising everywhere else now except for along his farmland. For 30 days the water threatened, but it never rose higher than where the 4 men had sat and prayed. It never went up past that log. Just as God heard Elijah's prayer for the boy, he heard the prayers of these pastors on the field, and he hears the prayers of those who he calls to watch over his people. Now, in today's time, it's no hidden secret, there's a crisis of authority going on right now. Nobody can stand authority. Nobody can stand anything telling them what to do. I like the way they bring it out right here in this little section I'm going to read. The United States society is experiencing a crisis of authority. From the childhood vaccination debates, from something that just kind of a little bit, what you might want to call small issues, all the way up to the election of President Trump, skepticism of the tried and true and the expert has gripped the nation. In 2017, a social scientist, Tom Nichols, published a thing he titled The Death of Expertise. And what it's saying is happening is the skepticism is growing at such a rate, and it's not that there's a loss of faith in the expertise, but a loss of faith in experts. Because I will say some experts in some fields, yeah, they've lied here and there. They've betrayed your trust. There's things that you just can't go. But we're seeing now there's a loss of faith in experts. There's people, they've lost faith in their pastors. They've lost faith in some, I mean, if they're not living their life the way they're preaching from behind the pulpit, so see, there's a line that's got to be followed from the top to the bottom. If you're preaching it, you've got to live it. If you're saying that it's what you're saying, the Bible is saying how a person should live their life, well, you're not exempt from it. So a lot of the issues that come with it causes this growing problem is when laws get passed that tell you got to do one thing, but the ones that pass the law are exempt from it. And I wish you could say that hasn't happened, but in all reality, it's happened right here in the United States. Now, that has caused a loss in faith. Now, not going into anything too deep, but there have been some recent events that were wrong. And it has caused a lack of faith in the people that hold office. There's no faith in police departments right now whatsoever. Thousands upon thousands of police officers going to work every day, going through what they're going through now because of the actions of a few. Now, so there's no, but it's even spilling over and goes into talking about how it's even in the way that knowledge is gained. People have become so rebellious that they don't even care what they're rebellion on. It's just there. They don't want to hear anything. School says to do something this way, they're not going to do it because they just don't want to do it that way. Church says they're going to do something some way, they're just not going to do it because they don't want to do it that way. Now, when all of the while, we're supposed to be able to trust the men of God because that's what we just read. He honors the prayers. If He puts somebody in a position of leadership, God's going to listen to their prayers. God's going to be there with them. He's not going to just dump you out in the middle of nowhere and say, okay, you're on your own. You deal with your own problems. And God doesn't measure things out the way that we measure things out. We measure success one way, God does another. And I'm butchering this all to pieces. Well, all this is going to come out here in a little bit. All right. We're kind of going to go through a few minutes here of a little bit of a history lesson. With the rise of King Ahab. The death of King Jeroboam sent the northern kingdom into a civil war, and it went crazy. It went from Jeroboam to Nebad to Bashaz to Zimri. He was only king for 7 days before he was overthrown by Omri. Now, Omri was able to bring in a little bit of stability to the region. He was able to do some things, I guess you might want to call good. But the lesson says that in his reign, there is never, not one time, anything mentioned about any kind of prophetic intervention. So it's like kind of there's no, maybe God wasn't necessarily high on his list of things. But you wonder, well, how did things go great? We'll get this in a minute. Omri and the dynasty that followed were the first since Solomon to have international roles. You know, when Solomon was king, he went out to other countries and he kind of made alliances with this one and with that one. After King Solomon died, we're like 400 years later, Israel kind of become its own thing again, and they dealt with everything internally. They didn't really talk to anybody outside, but now King Omri's come in, and he's kind of doing the same thing that Solomon did in a way, but the only problem was with Omri, he was doing the whole thing of, oh, you've got your God that you worship, well, that's fine, bring him with you, it's all hunky-dory, don't worry about it, it's fine, we'll just, you know, everything's the same way. It doesn't matter how you believe, as long as you believe something kind of mentality. And that didn't really, what he did was, one thing is right here is to seal a covenant with Sidon, he had his son Ahab marry Princess Jezebel. And with that come a lot of different things. This meant reintroduction of false gods. All that had been done and taken care of. Under Ahab, Baal worship was not simply tolerated, it was made the state religion. It's pretty much what was going on. All the time. Now, the promised land that was promised out to the Israelites, God's purpose for that was to punish the Canaanites for their false worship. Ahab and Jezebel's marriage represented the undoing of this conquest. You realize you can undo something God meant for good? You can undo it. And that's what we're seeing right here has happened here. You can undo God's blessings. Yes, God is absolute. He's all-powerful. He can do all things. He can do anything He wants. He controls everything on a molecular level. We'll look at that. That comes out a little bit. An example of that comes out here in just a little bit. But you can stop it, you can undo it, you can just obliterate in just a few moments something that a man of God has been building on for years. Now, we'll look right here at demands of obedience. God is not impressed or moved by worldly standards of success. Ahab was one of the most powerful kings you could ever see. He was a great military leader. He was smart. He had great economic success. That's what everybody wants to bank the success of everything on. How much money's rolling in? As long as it's rolling in by the barrels, nobody cares. Oh, well, it's successful. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's successful. What are you trading in for that success? What have you possibly lost? Now, you can still be successful and because you're being blessed by God by a work that you're doing. But see, even for any kind of a success, God's demand for obedience never changes. Obedience was the main focus of last week, and it still is this week. God's demand for obedience never changes. God still rejected the gods of Canaan. Didn't care how prosperous King Ahab was, God didn't say, well, okay, you've done pretty good for yourself. We'll just leave it alone. The obedience wasn't there. God wasn't in it. So they had a cultural shift. All right, think about you. The need for economic stability or the desire for recognition were sufficient reasons for sacrificing loyalty to God. That's what it was to Ahab. To Ahab, it was worth sacrificing his loyalty to God, worth just cutting off any of his obedience whatsoever to what God made to lead him and guide him into doing for his economic stability. I can do it better. The desire for recognition. I want to go down in history. I want to be known. Well, he's known now, but not for the reasons that he would have wanted. We can't trade in. You know, you look at a child of God, and I've used this 100 times before, a job promotion to the world sounds great by default. Oh, that's perfect. More money. Maybe better benefit package. All these different things may come with it, but you're trading in and having to work every Sunday. It's 7 days a week. It's long hours. It's this. It takes you out of God's house and it changes your mind. You have a shift in your culture, in your mind, and just you, what makes you you between you and God, because things didn't get. Sometimes we have to weigh out and pray about and say, well, God, it would be really good for this to happen. The money would be really good, but if it takes me outside of your will, I don't want it, kind of thing. That is still giving God your obedience. That's still showing God that, okay, I would love for this to happen. But see, to man, wanting that recognition, wanting to be known, that's not of God. Oh, I got to be this, I got to be that because I got a reputation to uphold. That's not of God. Elijah was mostly unknown. You know, the woman that we're talking about, we talked about last week, and she's been coming in here in just a little bit. The widow woman that he was sent to give him something to eat and some water, you never knew her name. There's people throughout the Bible that did great things. You never know their name. We know his name. We know what it means. Elijah, it means Yahweh is my God. But other than that, you don't know anything about Elijah. You don't know much. They know the name of like the town he was from. But they don't know where it was. Don't know where the town stood at. Don't know who his daddy was. You know, normally in the Bible you get, son of so and so. Him, we don't get anything. But we do know that he's a man of prayer. Throughout the scriptures that talk about Elijah, there are 14 separate prayer sessions on record that Elijah did. And the general theme through all 14 of them is they are simple, short, sweet, and to the point prayers. Kind of made me feel better about myself reading over this lesson, because I never noticed that. You know, I hate getting asked to pray in public, because my mind says, well, everybody is expecting this long, full of pretty words and just intellectual sounding just prayer. There ain't nothing wrong with being short, sweet, to the point. That prayer with food. Dear Lord, bless this food and the hands that prepared it. In Jesus' name, amen. Time to eat. You ain't got to be there no 10 minutes. Short, sweet. Praying for somebody for a healing. It ain't got to be no long, just begging God to do. God, you see what needs to be done. They have this need. You know what it is. They're honest prayers. Now, it says honest, open about despair and isolation. Now, that's Elijah was. He went through periods of isolation. He went through times where if he had come out of hiding, he'd have been killed. When he was at the brook. But he was always persistent. He prayed multiple times for the same thing. That's how prayer should be. Be simple, be honest, and be persistent. It's not just you got to pray one time. Well, I can't pray about that again. I've already prayed about it. Multiple times for the same thing. You just keep on. It is kind of like you're chiseling away at something. Now, what is the importance, do you think, in spiritual authority? Now, this little thing here about killing Baal, I asked Sister Sheena, I said, what is this talking about? She had to point this out to me. Here's the key point to last week. Elijah going to king and saying, there will be no rain till my God tells me to say it's going to rain. Baal was the god of the weather. So by this man standing and saying, it's not going to rain until I tell it to, it wiped out most everybody's faith in Baal. Well, his God beat out our God because we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing for Baal. We're sacrificing, we're doing our rain dances, we're doing everything that's supposed to make the rains come, and it's not happening. And he said it won't happen until he tells it to. Charles H. Kraft said, spiritual authority is in direct proportion to spiritual intimacy. Why is that? It's because the closer that you are to God, the more things you've experienced with Him, the more willing to obey Him you are. The further you're willing to step out, the more that you can be led by God because of that spiritual intimacy, and that adds to your spiritual authority. So his spiritual authority was why he was able to stretch out across that dead boy's body and pray the 3 times, just a simple prayer, God, let this boy's soul enter back into him. and the boy came back alive. But now with this authority, it doesn't come empty. It comes with a lot of responsibilities to be had. It's not something you cast aside. It's not something that you use when you want to. You use it when God tells you to use it. You let God lead and guide and show you where you need to have it. 1 Samuel 12 and 23, moreover, as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. I'm going to keep praying. You know, the scripture that talks about the repetition in prayer, you know, you just sit there, you know, I kind of in my mind want to think that God might be thinking, okay, look, I got what you were saying 2 minutes into your prayer, and now here we are 2 hours later, you're praying the same thing. You could be out doing something else for me right now. We kind of get tied up in what we think God is wanting us to be and what we think God wants us to do, and we get away from what God actually wants us to do. Spiritual authority, you've got to grow and develop. It doesn't just come overnight. It doesn't come high-powered right off the bat. It has to be built and added up to. It's not something that you can ever get away from. Once you gain that particular type of intimacy with God and you begin to enter that authority, like I said, you can undo, you can drop and walk away. God doesn't go anywhere from you with it, but you can choose to turn and walk away from God with it. That's not, I don't advise that. It's hard for me to understand how anybody, and I've said this 100 times, how anybody can have any kind of experience with God. Whether it's being filled with the Holy Ghost, or whether it's maybe seeing a miracle take place, or it's just seeing God in some way, form, or fashion, in any kind of way that you can't deny that was God. How in the world can they walk away from it? How can they go back to the life they were living before? I can't grasp it. But one thing that spiritual authority brings, it brings you from a passive to active readiness. Okay, now it's time to start doing something. I've got to be going. I've got to be doing. I can't just sit here alone. The widow trusted Elijah. Elijah had taken his fight against false gods into the God's homeland. He went after it. That passive to active. He went after it. And one thing I want you to focus on about the widow was willing to starve in obedience. Now I questioned that. I had to think about it for a second. How in the world, what that phrase makes no sense. She's willing to starve in obedience. That is, they just threw that in there to make her sound better than what she was. When Elijah first, last week, come off the brook, found her gathering sticks, told her to get him some water. Remember now, God done told him, I've commanded a widow woman to be there to provide for you. Asked her to get him some water. She starts on her way to get him the water. He stops her and says, oh, and please bring me a piece of bread. I'm hungry. Well, she tells him, I don't have any. I'm out here gathering sticks. I got a little oil. I got a little stuff in the barrel. I'm going to mix up. Me and my son's going to eat one last meal, and we're going to starve to death because this is all I got left. And he said, please, I pray, go make me a little cake first. Right. And she went and made his cake first, and the meal and oil never ran out. Right. She was willing to starve in her obedience because she knew God commanded me to be here to give this man whatever he needed. The water was easy. She'd go to the well and get water. But the food took something a little stronger. It took putting this man she never met before her own child. And we kick and scream because God wants me to wear this, or He wants me not to wear that, or He wants me to talk this way, and I can't do what I used to do this, and I can't do what I used to do that. We want to kick and scream when this woman was willing to die. Not for a martyrdom, not so people would remember her name, not to save anyone else's life, but just for pure obedience to God. Can you place your trust in a man of God to that extent? A man now, could you put yourself that far out? We should be able to. Now, granted, I will say, like I said a while ago, we've been burnt, we've been hurt, we've seen men of God fall, we've seen men of God, things come to light that were done in the dark and they weren't what we thought they were. We have seen that, but that doesn't mean we're supposed to pick and choose who we're going to trust. Y'all, this does kind of come with a blind. There was a man called in a question to the podcast I like to listen to. I've told you before about the Duck Dynasty guys, the Unashamed podcast. This man wrote a letter, email or something, and told them that he needed help with something. He had grew up in church, if I remember right. I'm paraphrasing all of this. He grew up in church, and his situation, it sounded a lot similar to like what we have. Just a small church, family ran. Services were very, I ain't going to say strict, but they were really planned out. They were thought out. About the same thing happened every service. Sounded like, ours. We kind of have a pattern. There's nothing wrong with. We do our prayer requests. We do our congregational songs. We do testimonies. We do specials. We do a course with the offering, and then the preacher comes up. Nothing wrong with that. Just kind of what he sounded like. He said, but all of my life, no one ever told me how to surrender to God. He said, this has eluded me, and it's causing me problems in my walk today. I can't figure out how I'm supposed to surrender to Him. And what they basically said in their discussion was, we think about things too hard. We try to compartmentalize God too much and put Him over here in this little corner, and He can only operate in this situation this certain way, and He can only operate in that certain situation that certain way. Well, all that's right is He is absolute all-powerful. He don't have any limitations in anything that He does. But the point they made to the young man was, the way you surrender to God is you wake up every morning, you have God on your mind, you pray, you read, that's great. You go to church, that's great. But that's not surrendering. Surrendering comes in forms of obeying ordinances or whatever you want to call them that a pastor may put into the church. Not even necessarily stipulations, but a guideline or how things need to be done or how you might need to think or how you might need to, not mind controlling, not micromanaging your life, but in a, this is what we do. Well, if there's no Bible going against it, you obey it, because through the obedience to the pastor, you're obeying God. God never, not one time, blessed or condoned any type of rebellion. Now, I'm not saying that if they're teaching wrong and you know they're teaching wrong and it's against Bible, you're supposed to just blindly follow them all the way through to the end. No, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But we can't be... We're trying to pick and choose too much of what we're going to follow and what we're going to obey, and it's spilling over into our obedience to God. And I'm saying us. I'm not saying anybody here is doing any of this necessarily. I'm saying the Christian faith as a whole. Things going on in this world that should make you mad. The Bible says you can get mad and be angry but sin not. That should compel us to some type of action, and we want to walk around with our hands over our eyes and act like we haven't seen anything. Now, I'm not saying we take matters into our own hands, but we can ask God, where can I enter into something that I can make a difference? wear something somewhere that I can be. Because sometimes we're going to be just like that woman was. You know, she told that man, I trusted you. I trusted you. You came. God told me to meet you out there. I met with you. You told me to bring you bread, bring you something to drink, and my meal and my oil would never run out. Everything would be great until the drought was over, and we'd be fine. And we ate many days off that same little bit of amount. It never went away, and we done fine. And now my child, what'd you do? You come here just to point out all my past sins and kill my son? What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? The widow recognized, she still did, O thou man of God, and she respected Elijah's spiritual authority. It kind of goes down to like what Brother Ray says a lot of times about police officers. That person you may not necessarily whatever care for, but that badge and the authority that comes with it, you better have some form of respect for. And it's causing a lot of the problems now that we're having, because people say, well, yeah, but that's because the deck's stacked up in his favor. You know, it's like playing gambling in a casino. The odds are against you. No matter what you say is going to work, you're going to lose at any point in time anyway. But still, and yet, that kind of, well, just don't do or be in a situation that's going to cause you to come into a negative interaction with a police officer. The widow recognized and respected Elijah's spiritual authority. Do we recognize and fully respect the authority of people in spiritual authority over us? When God's got people, He puts people in places, y'all, that's the only one I can think of right now of authority. He always has. He's always put somebody up front to be a leader. Always has put somebody up front for people to look to for guidance. You know, Moses, He put him in to lead and guide. He had Joshua lined up to come in after, and things went on as they were. We taught Joseph was made sure he was going to be in a position of leadership because he had the answer. He had the key to the problem. So all these people throughout the Bible, and even all through today's time, this didn't just happen. The culture connection, the miracle we just read about a few minutes ago, didn't happen in Bible times. That happened in 1989. I was 1 year old. That happened inside of my lifetime. Now we can't get so caught up in chasing miracles that we forget to chase after the miracle worker. But still and yet, there's going to be signs of God's sovereignty. There's going to be signs of His authority wherever He's at. If you've got Him, not like you got Him trapped, but when you've got God's attention, when you've got God and you've been growing in that intimate life with Him that we talked about just a minute ago, and we're gaining that trust with God, and our authority begins to kind of rise. When I mean authority, I don't mean you can just go up to any member of the church's house and say, give me some fried chicken. They're supposed to bring you a big plate of fried chicken. I'm not saying that. But in a spiritual realm, when the authority that they may speak something in, and it's not that God cowers to them, but God rewards their faith. Just like when He prayed over the boy. Bring this boy's life, let his soul enter back into him. And God put it back. Now, if I had jumped in there and done it, I may not have got any result whatsoever. Would have kind of been like the guy possessed and looked up and said, Peter I know, Paul I know, but who are you? Who do you think you are? I don't owe you anything. Because of the widow's faith and Elijah's prayers, God performed the miracle. So see, it works in together. That's one thing to look at with this. Another lesson to take from this widow woman. She was so obedient. In her obedience, she was willing to die. And then here she is. She's upset with Elijah. She's mad at him. But she never lost her faith in God nor her respect for Elijah. Why in the world, you've come here now my boy's dead. No, I ain't got nothing. And then, Elijah got to come back and say, see, he's alive. You overreacted. My God's bigger than your problems. See? 1 Kings 17:24, now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in thy mouth is truth. Do we realize how important it is that we've got to have every T crossed and every I dotted, because we need people to look at us, not just the preachers. We need people to be able to look at us and say, you're a child of God, and I know that the word of the Lord is in your mouth, and what you say is truth. So many lies are being told around the world now. Lies in what I guess you might want to call different religions. Lies in what is right and wrong. Lies lies are everywhere. And it's getting harder and harder for people to understand where truth is. We've been around the Bible most of our lives at this point in time, so it doesn't come into our mind to second guess it whatsoever. We understand, hey, if the Bible says it, it is truth. But so many people have been lied to in and out of every other aspect of their life. So lo and behold, they're going to have some questions. They're going to have some issues. That ability to surrender is getting harder and harder for people to do. But we still got to work with people and try to show them that it's not a if you can, or if you don't mind, or it'd be really great if you could. Submission to God and obedience to Him and His Word, that's a make or break. That's a deal or no deal. There's no way in or around it. Importance of spiritual integrity. What is it? I hear this all the time. We hear it in service here, and all that's supposed to crank back up at work. Integrity is doing the right thing even if no one is watching. No matter what. The trustworthy character of the prophet led the woman to trust in the character of God. The character of the prophet. Why? Because what the prophet was doing was God. He wasn't on his own agenda. He wasn't trying to build his own self up. He wasn't trying to make himself famous. He was just simply doing. That's why we know more about it, because he'd be telling everybody where he was from and what he's doing there. Because have you ever noticed how some of that changes when people get famous? You got people around small towns here in Georgia that they become famous, professional athletes, singers and actors and all different things like that. You ask them today where are they from, they're going to tell you Atlanta or Savannah. Because it doesn't matter. They want to make it's just why in the world they want to do that, I don't know. I would be proud to tell them I'm from Mount Vernon. You know. But no, they want to lead, and well, Brother Matt, it might be a way to keep them from, people from following them or finding their hometown. They don't live there no more. It ain't that. You might think less of them if you don't think they come from Atlanta. You might think less of them if they tell you they're from anywhere else but Savannah or anywhere other big cities and states. Because it makes them look better. We don't know anything about this man as far as that aspect. That same character is what we should be carrying today. It's what we strive every day to carry. It's what we attempt to do every single day. Are some days easier than others? Yes. Do we fail on some days? Yes. There are days I find myself in situations that I get to thinking back on it later, and I think, you know what, I wasn't as much of a Christian as I should have been in that. So, what that tells me is, I still got to get closer to God. Because the closer we get, the stronger our relationship with Him gets, and the more Him comes out of me. So getting closer to Him is something we all got to do. Because wouldn't you, everybody in here want to know, wouldn't you just want God radiating off of you? People walk by you in a store, not even have to give you a second glance, and they just feel something on them when they walk by you. Just, I don't know, a sense of peace or just a coolness about it, and wonder what in the world was that. You know, we hear of people that was asked to leave hospitals because they could walk by somebody, or they'd go into the room and pray for somebody, and that person was instantly be healed. God was using that individual, but look at what that individual has had to do, the life of obedience they've had to live to get to that point. For some people, it's easier than others, and that's why you do see some people seem to be like God uses them more than He does everybody else's. Well, it's not because He likes them more, it's because they're willing to obey more. They don't second guess, they don't, like we talked about last week when we got into the hesitation. They've gotten over that point. They don't really understand, okay, God, this is your orders, this is where I'm going to go. God's not going to put me in a situation that He can't handle with me in, so I'm going to go. Elijah was required to present himself trustworthy in his character and his demeanor. He had walked out in there to that woman and said, "Woman, go get me something to drink, give me something to eat, and bring it now." And just been rude and nasty to her, and I don't care nothing about you and that boy, go get me something to eat. Or you do know that I'm a man of God, you need to be the one that God had already done all that on His own. He didn't need Elijah adding to it. I've got a widow woman I've commanded to be there. Well, Elijah knew, like I said, when you go through certain situations in life, it builds your trust, it builds your faith. Okay, well, you've commanded ravens to bring me food, and I've been drinking water from right here, so if you can get a bird to do what you told it to do, I think you can get this woman to do what you told her to do. Right. But the woman has something a bird don't. Y'all, we have that free will. She could have told him, absolutely not. What little bit of food I got left is for me and my young'un and no one else. And that's exactly what it would have been. She would have gotten that last meal prepared for her and her son, and that would have been it. God would not have blessed that disobedience. But because of her willingness, I got it. You need some water, I'll go get it. All right, I'll make you this cake first, but I just don't see how. Even though her mind was probably doubting it. I don't see how this is going to do any good. Sorry, boy, but we're just going to have to do something else different. I got to make this man this cake. A life of spiritual authority is rooted in spiritual integrity. Integrity, doing the right thing even though no one is looking. Your spiritual integrity, even when ain't nobody watching, you still maintain the same standards, the same character of God that you would in a crowd of 1,000. That's where God can begin to really build and add and use you. Put you in places like He did Elijah, that it might not necessarily be the most comfortable thing that you've ever been in, but you know God's in it with you, and God can get some glory out of it. Think about it. He completely just shot down Baal, god of weather. Well, we can't get no rain now, because that man's God said it wasn't going to. Because Elijah was willing to go before the king and do what God told him to do. I can't go down there and tell that king that. He'll have me beheaded before I get out of the room. He went. Hey, king, it ain't going to rain. It's not going to do anything until God says it can happen. It's not going to happen. And then, Lord, like I said last week, put in a plan in place to, hey, get on out of town, get out here by this brook. Birds are going to feed you. Don't nobody know where you are, because if they can find you, they're going to kill you. Now, this little story right here, I love this in closing. A baker in a little country town bought the butter he used from a nearby farmer. One day, he suspected that the bricks of butter were not full pounds. It's supposed to be 1 pound of butter. He got to thinking these were a little too light, so for several days, he would weigh them. And he was right. they were short of the advertised weight, and he had the farmer arrested for cheating him. Now, I'm paying you for a pound of butter and you cheat me out of money. Now here we go. At the trial, the judge said to the farmer, I presume you have scales. You've been weighing this butter. And the farmer says, no, Your Honor. Then how do you manage to weigh the butter that you sell? Inquired the judge. The farmer replied, that is easily explained, Your Honor. I have balances, and for a weight, I use a 1 pound loaf of bread I bought from the baker. Baker's been cheating him out the whole time. Now, this one here, I don't know if this was funny or not, but Warren Buffett, chairman and CEO of the investment company Berkshire Hathaway, once said, in looking for people to hire, look for 3 qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first one, the other 2 will kill you. They can be smart as a whip. They can have all the energy they can have. They're there for work every day. They're the first one in the office in the morning. They're the last one to leave in the afternoon. But if they don't have integrity, they will kill you with those last 2. Because they'll be smart enough to figure a way something else out, and they got enough energy to follow through with what they're doing. Search for integrity. Search for it in ourselves. Search for it all around us. Let's see. We live in a world that is hungry for leadership with integrity. And I will say that there has been a pretty good streak of time where people of authority's integrity turns out to be questionable. Well, that's what happens. A lot of people can't take power. I know of several people, they get the tiniest little bit of authority and it goes straight to their head. You can't tell them anything. They know everything that you're doing. They know everything that everybody else is doing. They ain't got a clue what they're doing, but they're doing the best that they can. But don't you question them on nothing. Well, that does happen. I give that credit. But at the same time, you can't not trust anybody. You cannot trust any pastor because 1 or 2 have stumbled here and there. You can't not trust any preacher because 1 or 2 have stumbled. We can't not trust any. Now, you still have to use wisdom and be careful in anything and everything, but this last one that I'm going to say. You can't not trust any evangelist because you've had some come in and mess things up. We'll just say they threw a wrench in the works. But that doesn't mean there aren't any. That gets into a whole another discussion on that one. But think in our minds of how quick is it because of one interaction. Why does most people not like lawyers? That's always been around. Does that mean all lawyers are liars? Does that mean all of them can't be trusted? No, there's probably a handful out there somewhere that can be. I'm sure there is. You've been, city officials, state offices, all the way up through all types of government offices. There have been some times in places throughout history you get good ones and then you get bad ones. What do you have to do with it? Guys, it sounds bad, but you just have to deal with it when you have one of the bad ones, and when you have one of the good ones, you can trust. Has anybody got anything they want to add or any questions this morning?